Okay, I'm going live. Okay, we're live.
Okay.
All right. Can you guys hear us? Okay, just let us know in the chat if we're having any problems. All right, we'll just wait for a few more people to show up and then we'll start.
Okay.
We'll start at like 8:05 ish.
Uh-huh. How's everyone's projects going so far? That's great. Usually you're trying to rush towards the end.
That's the thing with these like international hackathons, just everyone's all over the place, and then you gotta wait for everyone to wake up, and everyone's on a different schedule. All right, I think we'll get started now. So my name is Athar. I'm from DevHacks, and today we're doing the Introduction to Python workshop with Leon. Will be done by Leon Yuan. He's a student right now at University of Texas at San Antonio, and I'll let him take it away.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. My name's Leon. I actually just graduated from University of Texas at San Antonio. I'll be working at AT&T soon. So today, the workshop will be on the introduction to Python. So let's go ahead and get started. So let's first talk about the prevalence of Python before we get into the inner workings of it. So what makes Python unique? Well, the first thing is that it's very versatile. You can use it with machine learning, software engineering, all your scripting. It's easy to learn, but despite being easy to learn, it still has a lot of depth to it. So there's a lot of companies that use Python. Pretty much every single company that I've seen uses some form of Python. The five provided use it for their software engineering stack as well. So Instagram, Quora, Reddit, Dropbox, Google. These are just a couple of the examples that use Python, but pretty much every single company that I've seen uses Python, at least for their machine learning stack. It's very powerful when it comes to software development. So there was a Flask workshop this morning, which was presented, and that's basically one way to use Python. There's Django, there's Fast API. These are all ways that you can create your REST API with. There's OpenCV, which you can use for computer vision, Selenium, and Beautiful Soup, which will be for interacting with the DOM or web scraping. There's scripting, there's GUIs, and there's also object-oriented programming. There's just a vast amounts of versatility with Python, which makes it very powerful. On the other hand, there's also machine learning, and there's so many tools in the machine learning aspect that Python is the primary leader, a primary language for machine learning. So there's Keras, there's TensorFlow, there's SpaCy, there's H2O, PyTorch, which is an alternative to the Google Keras TensorFlow stack. There's Pandas, NumPy, and SciPy. These are all pretty much your tools some of the tools that you'll be using if you're ever doing machine learning. And with these kind of tools, here's some of the possible projects that you can try. It's a little late, but maybe for the next hackathon, you could try this. So you could find a data set, dissect it to see what you can learn from it, what trends are there. And then if you feel like you've exhausted the data set, maybe you could try merging it with another data set, which I ended up doing at one of my previous hackathons. You can make a neural network that learns to play tic-tac-toe, something simple like that. On the other side, for game development, you could do like making a game using Pygame, Flappy Bird, Tetris, etc., or a web app using Flask or Django, and some sort of front end for it. So it could be a cooking recipe website, calendar, a to-do app, whatever you feel like making as your web app. Now I'll be talking about the installation of Python. So how you can install Python is go ahead and go to python.org/downloads. I picked the latest release, which is 3.9.5, and go ahead and pick the version that matches your architecture and operating system. So a quick distinction is Python 2 is not equal to Python 3. This is very important because code that works in Python 2 more often than not does not work in Python 3. There's a lot of different changes that happen between Python 2 and 3. So go ahead and just stick with Python 3 because that's the one that keeps getting updated now. Python 2 has pretty much ended. For today, I'll be using PyCharm if I do end up getting to the demo, but just as a backup, use PyCharm as your IDE. It's a pretty powerful IDE, and it's probably one of the best that you can use for Python. So now we'll just get started talking about Python basics. We'll be talking about variables first. So for variables, there's like there's three main ways to work with a variable or to declare a variable. One is using a variable value. So if I want to set hello world or set y to hello world, I can just do y equals hello world. So that is just the variable value. But I could also use another variable's value. So if I do x equals y, I am taking the value of y and placing that into x. So now x is also equal to hello world. You could also use an expression rather than just the value. So when I do z equals 20 times 5 plus 1, I do the 20 times 5 first, get 100. 100 plus 1 is equal to 101. And so z is now equal to 101. Okay, now we'll be talking about some of the data types. I won't go over all of them, but I'll go over some of the more crucial ones. So there's int, which is a whole number. Unlike other languages, it's unbounded. So I guess like if you're starting from Java, if you're starting from C, or languages along those lines, your max for your integer is 2 to the 32 minus 1. However, in Python, there's no limit. So it can be as big as you want it to be. It can be like negative as well, as big as you want it to be. And so there's no bounds from that aspect. It can only get as big as your memory, but it's not blocked off by a certain size. Floats are the same way. They're a decimal number. They're also unbounded. And then there's strings, which are a sequence of characters, and they're surrounded by either a singular quote or a double quote. So the example of hello world and hello everyone, you just need to make sure that if you start with a single quote, it ends with a single quote. If you start with a double quote, it ends with a double quote. And then last but not least, we'll be talking about bool, which stands for booleans, which is a way to show true or false. The true or false in Python has like a capital, has their first letter capital, so capital T or capital F, and then the rest of the word. But this also includes truthy falsy values. So in Python, aside from true and false, there's also truthy falsy, which is values that can stand for false and values that can stand for true. So other than false, there's 0, none, 0.0, empty list, or empty string, and these all match false. And everything else is pretty much true if you end up using these as part of your Boolean expression. If you ever need to cast, how you would cast, or if you ever need to change between data types, really specify what casting was. You can change their types by casting. So you could do string with the parentheses around a number, and you can change that to a string. If you do int of a float, then it'll change the float to an int. And these are the two examples provided. Now we'll be moving on to operations. So there's arithmetic operations that are in Python. There's the plus, minus, multiply, and divide. They're pretty intuitive. So if I do 2 plus 3.0, then it'll give me 5.0, which is the result that you would add up. It will, if there's a float, it'll always end up as a float. Okay, and then if there's minus, you do 3 minus 2, then you'll get 1. 3 times 2, you'll get 6. So for the division, you'll always get a decimal, no matter if it ends up whole or not. And that's because we'll have another operator that will help you will give you a whole number instead. So 4 divided by 2, even though is a should be an integer amount of 2, it still comes out as 2.0. So here are the rest of the arithmetic operations that will be covered. There's mod, or percent. So if I do the 14 modulus 4, it just means the remainder of when I do 14 divided by 4. So the remainder of 14 divided by 4 is 2, because if I take 12 away from 14, then there's 2 left. The double asterisk means to the power of. So if I do 6 double asterisk 2, then it's 6 to the power of 2. Just keep in mind that these will go through PEMDAS, and so if you order them incorrectly, then they'll end up with a different result from what you originally expected. And then there's the double division, which means floor division, and that basically means the whole number of when you divide something by something. So if I do 14 floor division 4, it ends up being 3, because 14 divided by 4, you get 3 remainder 2. And so that's how you get your results here. There's also concatenation. So keep in mind, this is only for strings. So you use the plus symbol, and basically it adds the 2 words together. So it's kind of wrong. I forgot to take out the space. But basically it'll be hello world without the space. Sorry about that. Okay, and then there's Boolean operators. There's equal to. So there's 2 equals 2.0. And this is true if both sides are equal. Otherwise they're not. Otherwise they're false. Not equals is if both sides aren't equal. So if I do 3 is not equal to 2, that's true. If I do greater than, then I can do 3 is greater than 2, which is true. And so greater than is basically only true if the left is strictly greater than the right. Otherwise, it's false. There's greater than or equal to, where it's true if if the left is greater than or equal to the right. So 2 is greater than or equal to 2 ends up becoming true. Less than is true if the left is less than the right, or strictly less than the right. So 8 is less than 3 is false, because it's not less than it. And then there's less than or equal to. So it's true if it's if the left side is less than or equal to the right. So if 2 is less than or equal to 3, ends up becoming true. Okay, there's three more Boolean operations that you should know, which are and, which is different from most other languages where they use two ampersands. So the and performs an and operation. Basically, both sides need to be true in order for the result to be true. So if I do true and false, it'll end up being false because both sides aren't true. And then there's or, which performs an or operation. It basically means both sides, or either side needs to have a true, otherwise it's false. So this leaves three options: true or true or false or true. So in our case, true or false ends up becoming true. So not is only applied on one operand. So if I use not on a true, it'll flip to false. And if I do not on a false, it'll flip to true. Sorry, that was a lot. We'll be going over some questions, and maybe that will help out in understanding some of the material that was just covered. So go ahead and try to solve the first one, where it's 8 mod 5, where it's not equal to, and 2 is less than 6 and less than 10. So what you see on the right side is something unusual from different languages, where you can kind of stack your less thans together. And so this is something unique about Python, where you can do this rather than having to use another and operation. So I can do 2 is less than 6, which is less than 10, as a singular expression. Okay, we can start with what's in the 8 mod 5. What does that give? Go ahead and type it out in the chat. Okay, so 8 mod 5 ends up being 3 actually. So if 3 is not, is 3 not equal to 2? Yes, so that ends up being true. And the right side is also true. So the result is true. Okay. So let's move on to the next one. So there's x equals 20 and x is divided by equals to 5. So this is equal to x is equal to x divided by 5, which is the same thing as x divided equals 5. It's just a short notation for whatever is on the right. So if I do 20 divided by 5, what does x end up becoming? So it ends up becoming 4. Okay. So for this last one, if I do y equals Leon and y plus equals 5, what would be the result? Yes, it ends up being an error. Why is that? Yes, there are different types of, there are different data types. So in order to fix it, you'll have to change it to a string, and then you can have it concatenate together. Okay, now we'll be moving on to control structures. So these will be like your if, elif, else statements. So if you're coming from a different language, your elif is replacing your else ifs. And basically you'll be putting in Booleans. And if it satisfies the Booleans, then it'll perform the statements. And one thing to remember is make sure to use indentation, otherwise it'll be wrong. And if you ever use an if, elif, else statement, you always need an if. It doesn't always have to have an elif or else, whichever one, but it must always have an if you're trying to do an if statement, an if else statement, or an if elif statement. And one more thing is the statements cannot be empty. And so what you can do instead is you can use pass if you don't have any statements currently and come back to it later. So the Boolean can be whatever expression that you make using the Boolean operators. It can end up also being truthy values or falsy values, whatever is what you're looking for. And that's how you can get your if, elif, else statements to work. So let's look at an example. So if presenter is equal to Leon, then print, hi, I am Leon. Elif audience is not equal to you, so print hello audience, else print none of them matched. So which one would match? Or which statement would end up printing? So the hello audience would end up being printed here. So if you look here, I don't include the quotation marks because when something is printed, there's no quotation marks that will come out unless you use escape characters. Now we'll move on to while statements. So while statements use while Boolean, colon, so while Boolean expression, colon, and then followed by statements. Make sure to use your indentation. And this keeps happening until your Boolean expression ends up being false. Try not to make this an infinite loop without a reason. And the statements, like the if statement, cannot be empty. So what you could do is you could use your pass as well here. But that's something up for you to decide. So here's an example. If I do the loop var is equal to 0, and I am doing a simple while loop where I'm checking if the loop variable is less than 16 and adding 1 each time, what will the loop variable be at the end? So it'll end up being 16. Since it has to match, or it has to be at least greater than or equal to 16 in order for it to end the while loop. So if it's 15, you're still in the while loop, right? And so that's why you need it to be 16 to end the while loop. Now we'll be moving on to for loops. So for loops work basically in the way of for variable in a list, and then there's a bunch of statements that can follow from the for loop. So make sure you use your indentation on your statements. You can use your variables, the variable that you set in the for loop, in your statements, and the statements can't be empty again. Oh, Jason, it doesn't matter if it starts at 0 or 1, since it has to end by being greater than or equal to 16. So even if loop variable started at 1, it'd still be 16 by the end of the loop. Okay, so now we'll be moving on to the for loop example. So if I am just printing my for loop each time, it'll end up using the 2, the 4, the 6, the 8, and the 10 each time. If you're, I guess like if you come from a different language, this would be most similar to like a for each loop. If you're thinking like Java, I guess there's also for eaches in JavaScript as well. And so since this one's not as difficult, it'll just be like all of them combined together, since I never printed out a space. But it makes it a lot easier because then I don't have to concatenate. Okay, now we'll be moving on to lists. We kind of talked about lists, didn't really go into the details of lists, but lists in Python are zero indexed. So they're unbounded and can be different types. So basically it doesn't have to be all a singular type. You can use the index to access an element, and you can also use negatives to access from the back, or from the, I guess like the reverse of the list, so like going backwards. And also strings are a type of list, so you can do most of these operations on a string. I guess the first index is 0, the second index is 1, and it'll keep going on like increasing that way. But if you want to do the reverse, the last one is -1, and it keeps decreasing by 1 all the way till you get to the first one, which then ends up being, in this case, -5. So list 0, if I'm trying to access list 0, that's 2. And then if I try to access list -1, that's 10. And then you can also change out what's in your list by doing list 0 is equal to 3 rather than like equals equals. And this is just like changing the value of the list. So after I do the last statement, it'll be 3, 4, 6, 8, 10. Next, there's matrices. So matrices are basically lists within a list. And so these are useful for if you're trying to keep track of a 2D grid, or other things along those lines. But basically, you'll require 2 fields to access an element. You can still use negatives, and they're still under the same properties as a list. It just means that there's more lists involved. So if I do matrix 0, 1, in this case, it would be 2, 4, because we're getting the first list, which is 0, index 0. And then we're getting the second element, which is index 1, which then becomes 4. Now, if we're doing matrix -1, which is the last list, and then -1 again, which is the last element, then we get 12. And then if we just want to grab one list at a time, we could do matrix 0, and that gives us the very first list, which is 2, 4. And then there's slicing, which is one of the most powerful ways to use your lists is by slicing it. So slicing basically is notated in a way where there's 3 numbers and they're all delimited by colons. So if you look at list 0:2:1, that is what we'll be trying to cover. So the first slot is the starting location. So the starting location is index 0, and the default of that is usually 0. The second slot is the ending index +1. It's basically saying that it'll be where basically it'll end before it gets to this index. So when you see the 2, it's just saying it'll end before it gets to the 2. And then there's the 1, which is the step amount. It just means how much it'll move. Will it jump 1 forward? Will it jump 2 forward? I'll provide some more examples on the next slide. So those are the main things you need to know about slicing. So if we look at the one beneath the first slice, you see :2. And what's happening here is you're using the default values to end up with the same result. So if I do :2, that's the only thing I changed, and the default's not the length of the list anymore, or the number of elements in the list anymore, but rather it ends at index 2. But it still starts at index 0, and it still has a step of 1. Okay, so we'll just do some slices and try to work through them. So if I do list ::(-1), it basically means it starts at 0. The end is at the number of elements, so that's 5, but the step is -1. So what would the results be here? Okay, the result will end up actually being the reverse of the list. So it's not explicitly stated, but if the step is negative, it'll start from the back. Now, what if it's ::(2)? This means the step is 2. So what does the step is 2 mean? It means that from the index where you first started, which is 0, you keep adding 2 to it until it reaches the end. Yes. sorry, I have like some delay of the chat on my end. So yeah, it skips every other number. So in this case, it'll end up being 2, 6, 10, like what Vivian put. Now, how about for the last one? So it's going to be similar to the previous one, except it ends at index 1. Okay, so this one will end up just being the 2 because the 6 is actually past the 1. So it's just it's just index 0. So you end up getting a list of 2. Okay, yeah, correct, Vivian. Okay, so now we'll be talking about some of the built-in functions that you need, as well as maybe talking about about how you can use user-defined functions. So the first one we want to talk about is len, which stands for length. And this can be used on strings. It can be used on lists. Basically, if you use it on a list, it'll return the number of elements in the list. If you use it on a string, it'll return the number of characters in the string. But basically, you should never try to access len of list directly. Maybe subtract 1, subtract 2, because len of list is always out of bounds. So in this case, the len of the list is 5, and the length of the word is also 5. Or the len of the word is also 5. Now we'll be talking about range. So range is very helpful for loops. Keep in mind, range is not actually a list, but I am representing it as such right here, just to make it easier for you to understand. And it works in a similar fashion to slices. So for slices, we have to tell it the beginning, or the start, the end, and the step. So the same thing happens for range. So the first one is the start, the end, and the step. But what you can end up doing is having default values for the start and the step of 0 and 1. However, there is no default value of the end. And so you must always declare like what value it will end at, because it's not like a list where there's a set end. And so that's why if you do range 5 and range 0, 5, 1, they end up being the same. And this is helpful if you're trying to do a for loop of like, maybe I just want to run this for loop 5 times. I can just do range 5 rather than creating a for loop or a list that has 5 elements. And so if you want the values within the range, so like you can mess with where it starts, what step it has, and these can be used for your range. There's print. Print is pretty self-explanatory, but just remember it has to be a singular type. It'll be going to system out. So if I'm printing 1, then I print 1. If I print hello audience, then I print hello, then hello audience appears. Keep in mind, no quotation marks unless you use escape sequences. And last but not least, and last for the built-in functions, we're going to be talking about min and max. So min and max are different from other languages. You can actually put more than 2 values in it. And it'll give you the lowest out of all that are given. The minimum amount is 2. Otherwise, it would be kind of pointless. And I believe it can be as long as you want it to be based off of your memory. So min will return the lowest out of all the given, and max will return the highest. And lastly, we'll be talking about user-defined functions. So if you ever want to define your own functions, you can do def, and then your func name, all your argument names, and then statements. So the things to remember is you can have any amount of arguments, but try to limit that a little bit more. It's recommended to do so that there's not a lot of I guess there's not a lot of things being passed in at once. It can have any amount of statements and is very useful for reusable code. And the last thing we'll be talking about today is importing. So you can import modules in Python, and that's what makes it very powerful. So you can use built-in library or built-in modules such as random and OS. So if you want to import from them, you can do import random, or you could do from that module import a certain part. So if I'm doing OS path, I could do from OS, I can import specifically path. So if you ever need to access anything imported, you can use the name you provided. So random.randint or path.basename. These are kind of like what you can use to call that specific module. And usually you want to put your imports at the top of the file, but your functions don't have to be at the top of the file. They can be wherever. And last thing is installing new modules with pip. So pip install allows you to install new modules. Usually it comes with your Python if you installed it. If you need help with pip, please contact a mentor. I might be able to assist, but I might not be able to help immediately. And so that's what the mentors are here for the hackathon. I do not have enough time for the demo, but I can go through what I was planning to do. I'll just go through what I was planning to do. So I was originally going to be doing Connect 4 and turning it on its side. So this can just help me keep track of one row at a time, since they can only ever enter from one side. And then basically I'll be using this to keep track of my table. There's subproblems of checking for a win. So if you're checking for a win, you have to check row, column, diagonal, or the other diagonal, and then check if they're all check if a 4 in a row are the same element or the same letter, and then add a new piece in, and then you keep iterating until someone wins. So this is the other type of, those are the two different diagonals that I mentioned, but I will not have enough time to cover the demo. So I talked about this demo mainly so that I could build off of it. So if you ever want to work on a future project, start with something small and keep adding on to it. So later on, I could add a score tracking system. Maybe I can add the AI that can play the Connect 4. Originally, I ended up using random, which isn't very powerful. And then you could add online multiplayer, make it a GUI. Originally, I was using it doing it by printing. And so there's a lot of things that you can always improve. And so that's basically how you should continue building on top of the project. All right. thank you for watching, and I hope the 50 minutes has been worth it. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the chat. You can talk about Python. You can talk about, I guess, like other stuff, maybe internships. Yeah. I'll be here until 9 o'clock Eastern time. Is that correct, Althar?
Uh, well, thank you
Is that
for
correct, Althar?
yeah. So if you guys have any, can you hear me, Leon?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Uh, well, thank you
Is
for
that correct, Althar?
yeah. So if you guys have any, sorry about that, my computer's muted, but yeah. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask Leon. I think I have a question for you personally.
Okay.
Um,
I
so
see one question from Vivian.
oh yeah, I answer that one first.
Okay. So I think for internships, the most important thing is apply early and apply to a lot. Um, I don't know what year you're currently in, but that's usually helpful. Um, so if you're applying for a summer internship, you should be applying like early fall. Um, if you're applying for a winter, so if you don't know what a winter internship is or a winter co-op is, it's basically from January to April. You should be applying around the same time you apply for your summer internship. So that's also like early fall. And if you're planning to do one in the fall, you can apply, I believe it's around summertime. So like around May is probably when you would apply for a fall internship. Hope that helps. But yeah, it's a lot of connections. Just try to meet more people. Um, you I think I've had the best experience just trying to meet people rather than trying to focus on the internship. I think that's what makes you stand out and you look less desperate. Atharv, if you want to ask your question, go for it.
Yeah, sure. So a lot of us, a lot of kids here are just like high school students and everything, and
Mhm.
a lot of them are probably going to pursue computer science or something in that field, in the IT field when they go to college. So, as a former student, could you speak on that experience? Like what's like, as a CS student, just going through the process and everything in college?
Um, okay, so I guess like because you've already been to a hackathon, I'm guessing you have some sort of experience. Um, I think the most important thing is not so much focus on classes. Yes, classes are important, but I think it's keeping up with the field, keeping up with, I guess, like some sort of news source. I recommend like daily.dev if you haven't heard that. So that's one thing that I recommend. Try to get involved as well, whether it's with your city community or with your orgs on campus. If there's no org, make one maybe. You'll grow a community there. I think those are very helpful. They show leadership. Um, I think classes are often seen as like very important, and I think they're important. But I think what you can gain out of leadership skills is also important. And then I think like because classes don't necessarily go into what you want to cover, just feel free to do stuff on your own rather than like what the classes require you to do. Usually classes take a toll on you, but yeah, you should try to spend some of your free time on like other things that aren't covered in classes. I think it just starts with being able to know what's out there and starting with that. So I actually have like high school experience doing like some sort of coding. I did like some sort of competitive programming in high school, but I think for me, I just didn't know anything in the software engineering realm, the machine learning realm, and that's what I've been trying to catch up on these past 4 years, and learning about like all the different technologies that are currently out there.
Okay, thanks, Leon, for the information. It's very valuable.
Yeah.
Um, if there's no more questions, we can end the stream right here. I'll give it another minute or so, and then
Mhm.
we can log off, and you guys can go back to your hacking. So, any last minute questions or? Um, oh, there's actually a delay in the stream, so I think I'll wait a
Yeah,
little.
can you look at the YouTube? That might
Yeah,
be.
I'm looking at it right now. It's like almost like a 5 second delay,
Okay,
so or
gotcha.
10 seconds maybe. So checking the YouTube, there's nothing there. Okay, so then I guess we'll call that the end of
Yeah, if you
stream.
still have questions, you could probably leave them in the Intro to Python channel or just DM me. I should be able to answer. I don't know when, but I'll get to you.
Yeah, so thank you all for coming. Thank you, Leon, for hosting this. Um, and I guess we'll wrap it up there. Thank you. Thank you, guys.
All right, thanks.